The baby's cry pierced through the cold November dawn of 1882, and Damon Crawford froze on his porch in San Bernardino, California, his hand still wrapped around the handle of his coffee mug. He had heard many sounds in his 32 years, from the thunder of stampeding cattle to the crack of gunfire during his time as a ranch foreman. But nothing had prepared him for the sight of a woven basket sitting just beyond his doorstep, a tiny fist flailing against the faded blanket tucked around a small body. His boots made hollow sounds against the wooden planks as he stepped forward, his breath forming clouds in the crisp morning air. San Bernardino was nestled in a valley surrounded by mountains, and winter mornings carried a bite that most folks underestimated. The baby, no more than a few months old by the look of it, had a tuft of dark hair and eyes that seemed too aware for something so small. Damon crouched down, his weathered hands hovering over the basket as if it might disappear if he touched it. A folded piece of paper was tucked beneath the blanket's edge. He pulled it free and unfolded it with careful fingers, reading the shaky handwriting that seemed to have been written in desperate haste. "Please keep her safe. Her name is Rose. I will come back for her when I can. I promise." The signature was simply an N, nothing more. Damon's jaw tightened as he looked down at the infant again. Rose had stopped crying and was staring up at him with dark eyes that reminded him of his younger sister before she had passed from fever 10 years prior. He could not leave a baby on his porch, but he also had no idea what to do with one. His ranch was a working operation with cattle and horses, and he lived alone in a modest 2-story house that his father had built before heading further west. He scooped up the basket and carried it inside, setting it on the kitchen table. Rose made a small sound, not quite a cry but a whimper that suggested she might be hungry. Damon ran a hand through his dark hair, already trying to figure out what babies ate and where he could get it. The town was small but growing, with a general store, a church, a saloon, and a handful of other businesses that served the ranchers and farmers in the area. The door to his house burst open just as he was wrapping, Rose more securely in the blanket. His ranch hand, Miguel, stood in the doorway with wide eyes. "Boss, I heard a baby crying. Did I hear right?" "You heard right," Damon said, his voice rough. "Found her on my porch." Miguel stepped inside and closed the door behind him, his weathered face creasing with concern as he approached the table. "Madre de Dios. Who would leave a baby? Someone desperate," Damon said quietly. He showed Miguel the note, and the older man shook his head slowly. "You are going to keep her here. Until I figure out what to do, yes. I cannot just hand her over to anyone. The note says her mother will come back." Damon looked down at Rose, who was starting to fuss again. "But right now, I need to get her some milk and whatever else babies need." Miguel nodded. "My daughter, she has children. I will ride to her place and get supplies. You stay here with the little one." Damon agreed, though the idea of being alone with a baby made him more nervous than facing down a charging bull. Miguel left quickly, and Damon found himself pacing the kitchen while Rose's cries grew more insistent. He tried rocking the basket gently, then picked her up with the kind of caution he might use handling a newborn calf. She was so light, so fragile, and her cries seemed to fill the entire house. "All right, Rose," he murmured, holding her against his chest. "I do not know what I am doing, but I promise I will figure it out." The baby's cries softened slightly at the sound of his voice, and Damon kept talking, saying anything that came to mind about the ranch, the weather, the mountains in the distance. It felt foolish, but it seemed to help. By the time Miguel returned with a basket of supplies, including cloth diapers, a glass bottle, and fresh goat's milk from his daughter's farm, Damon had managed to get Rose to sleep against his shoulder. Miguel showed him how to warm the milk and feed the baby, and together they fumbled through changing her diaper. It was awkward and messy, but Rose seemed content once she had a full belly and a dry cloth beneath her. Damon set up a drawer from his bedroom dresser as a makeshift crib, padding it with soft blankets. "What will you do?" Miguel asked as they stood watching Rose sleep. "I will take care of her until her mother comes back," Damon said firmly. "And if anyone comes looking for her with bad intentions, they will have to go through me." Miguel nodded, a small smile touching his lips. "You have a good heart, boss, but this will not be easy. Nothing worth doing ever is." 3 days passed and no one came to claim Rose. Damon fell into an exhausting routine of feeding, changing, and trying to soothe the baby whenever she cried. His ranch work suffered, but Miguel and the other hands picked up the slack without complaint. Word spread through San Bernardino about the baby found on Damon Crawford's porch, and folks had opinions ranging from sympathy to suspicion. On the 4th day, Damon was in town buying more supplies when he noticed a young woman watching him from across the street. She was slender, with auburn hair that caught the sunlight and green eyes that held a mixture of longing and fear. She wore a simple dress that had seen better days, and her hands were clenched tightly at her sides. Damon pretended not to notice her as he loaded his purchases into his wagon, but he kept her in his peripheral vision. When he climbed onto the wagon seat, she took a hesitant step forward, then stopped. He decided to wait, holding the reins loosely in his hands. Finally, she crossed the street with quick, nervous steps. Up close, he could see she was young, probably no more than 23 or 24, with freckles across her nose and dark circles under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. "Mr. Crawford." Her voice was soft but steady. "That is me," he said, studying her face. "I heard about the baby you found." Her hands twisted together. "Is she well?" Damon's grip tightened on the reins. "She is well, fed and warm and safe." The woman's eyes filled with tears that she blinked back quickly. "Thank God, I have been so worried." "Are you her mother?" She nodded, the movement jerky and desperate. "My name is Nora Fenwick. I am the one who left her on your porch." Damon was silent for a long moment, watching the emotions play across her face. She looked terrified, exhausted, and heartbroken all at once. "Why?" "Because I had no other choice." The words came out in a rush. "I am alone here. Rose's father died in a mining accident before she was born, and I have been trying to make ends meet, but I lost my job and my room at the boarding house. I had nowhere to go, no way to feed her. I heard you were a good man, someone who would not hurt a baby, and I thought maybe if I left her with you, she would at least have a chance." "Where are you staying now?" Nora looked down at her worn boots. "I have been sleeping in the back room of the church. Reverend Martin has been kind, but I cannot stay there forever. I have been looking for work, but no one wants to hire a woman with a baby. When I heard you took her in, I thought maybe I could find a job, save some money, and then come back for her." Damon studied her face, seeing the truth in her eyes. She was not a woman who had abandoned her child out of cruelty, but out of desperation. "Get in the wagon." "What?" "Get in the wagon," he repeated. "If you are Rose's mother, then you should be with her. And if you need help, then I will help you." Nora stared at him as if he had spoken a foreign language. "You do not even know me." "No, but I know what it is like to be alone and desperate, and I know that Rose needs her mother." He extended a hand to help her up. "Come on. We can figure out the rest." She hesitated only a moment before taking his hand and climbing onto the wagon seat beside him. Her fingers were cold and thin, and he could feel her trembling. Damon clicked his tongue at the horses, and they started moving through town toward his ranch. They rode in silence for several minutes before Nora spoke again. "Why are you doing this?" "Because it is the right thing to do," Damon said simply. And because Rose has already worked her way into my heart over these past few days. I cannot imagine just handing her off to an orphanage or to strangers. But you do not owe me anything. He glanced at her, taking in the proud tilt of her chin despite her obvious exhaustion. Maybe not, but that baby deserves a chance, and so do you. When they arrived at the ranch, Damon led Nora inside. The house was messier than usual, with baby supplies scattered across the kitchen table and a pile of laundry he had not gotten around to washing. Rose was asleep in her makeshift crib in the parlor, and Nora rushed to her side with a small cry. Damon watched as she knelt beside the drawer, her hands hovering over the baby just as his had done that first morning. Tears streamed down her face as she gently stroked Rose's soft hair. "My sweet girl," she whispered. "Mama is here. I am so sorry." He left them alone for a few minutes, stepping outside to give Nora privacy. When he returned, she was holding Rose against her chest, rocking back and forth with her eyes closed. The baby had woken and was making small, content sounds. "She has been eating well," Damon said quietly. "Miguel's daughter sent over goat's milk and showed me how to prepare it, and she sleeps pretty good at night, though she wakes up once or twice for feeding." Nora looked up at him with red-rimmed eyes. "Thank you. I do not know how I can ever repay you." "You do not need to repay me. But we do need to figure out what comes next." He pulled out a chair at the kitchen table and sat down, gesturing for her to do the same. She settled into the chair across from him with Rose still in her arms. "I need to find work," Nora said. "I have experience cooking and cleaning, and I can sew. I just need someone willing to hire me." Damon considered this. His house could certainly use a woman's touch, and he had been managing his own meals with varying degrees of success since his mother had passed 5 years ago. "What if you worked here?" "Here. I need someone to help with the house, and I could use decent meals instead of the burnt beans I have been making. You and Rose could stay in the spare bedroom upstairs. I would pay you fair wages, and you would be with your daughter." Nora's eyes widened. "You would let us live here?" "The house is big enough, and Rose is already settled here." He met her gaze steadily. "I am not asking for anything inappropriate, Miss Fenwick. You would have your own room, and this would be a working arrangement, but it seems like a solution that could help all of us." She was quiet for a long moment, looking down at Rose's small face. "Why are you being so kind to us?" "Because someone was kind to me once when I needed it most," Damon said, "and because I meant what I said earlier. Rose worked her way into my heart, and I want to see her grow up safe and happy. If that means helping her mother get back on her feet, then that is what I will do." Nora's lower lip trembled. "All right. Yes, thank you, Mr. Crawford. Call me Damon." "Nora," she said softly. They spent the rest of the day settling Nora and Rose into the spare bedroom. It was a decent-sized room with a window overlooking the pastures and mountains beyond. Damon brought up a rocking chair from the parlor so Nora could sit comfortably while feeding Rose, and he helped her arrange the few belongings she had retrieved from the church. That evening, Nora cooked dinner while Damon tended to Rose. It felt strange and right all at once, standing in his kitchen with a baby in his arms while the smell of real food filled the house. When they sat down to eat, it was the first time in years that Damon had shared a meal with someone in his own home. "This is delicious," he said after the first bite of stew. Nora smiled slightly. "Thank you. It is nice to have a proper kitchen to work in." They talked as they ate, sharing bits of their stories. Nora had come to San Bernardino with her husband 2 years ago, hoping to make a fresh start after leaving Missouri. He had been a miner, chasing dreams of striking it rich, but a cave-in had taken his life along with 3 other men. She had been pregnant at the time and had managed to get by working at a boarding house until Rose was born. But the owner had told her she could not keep a crying baby in the building, and she had been forced to leave. "I tried everything," she said quietly. "I asked every business in town for work, but they all turned me away once they found out about Rose. I pawned everything I had of value, but it was not enough. I was terrified she would starve or that we would freeze when winter came. That is when I heard about you." "What did you hear?" "That you were a fair man who treated your workers well. That you had lost your family and understood what it meant to be alone. One of the women at the church said you had helped a family whose barn burned down last year, that you gave them money and supplies without asking for anything in return." She met his eyes across the table. "So I took a chance. I left Rose on your porch and prayed I had made the right choice." Damon reached across the table and covered her hand with his. "You did. I will protect you both, I promise." Her eyes filled with tears again, but this time they were accompanied by a tentative smile. "I believe you." As the weeks passed, a routine developed. Nora took care of the house and the cooking while Damon managed the ranch. He found himself coming inside more often than necessary, drawn by the sound of Nora humming as she worked, or by Rose's happy babbling. The baby was growing quickly, becoming more alert and responsive with each passing day. Damon would sit with Rose in the evenings, letting her grip his calloused fingers while Nora prepared dinner. He read to her from books he had not opened in years, his deep voice filling the parlor with stories of adventure and far-off places. Nora would listen from the kitchen, a soft expression on her face as she worked. They were careful around each other at first, maintaining proper distance and formality. But gradually, the walls between them began to crumble. Damon found himself laughing more than he had in years, especially when Rose did something particularly endearing or when Nora told stories about her childhood in Missouri. Nora began to relax, her smiles coming more easily and her shoulders losing some of their permanent tension. One evening in late December, a storm rolled in from the mountains, bringing with it heavy rain and cold winds. Damon came inside soaked to the bone after securing the barn and checking on the livestock. Nora immediately went to work, bringing him towels and hanging his wet clothes by the fire. "You will catch your death," she scolded gently, wrapping a blanket around his shoulders. "I have been through worse," he said, but he was grateful for her concern. They sat together by the fire while Rose slept upstairs, listening to the rain pound against the windows. The storm reminded Damon of the night his parents had died in a flash flood, and without thinking, he began to talk about them. Nora listened quietly, her hand eventually finding his and squeezing gently. "They would have liked you," he said finally. "My mother especially. She always said this house needed children's laughter in it." "Rose certainly provides that now," Nora said with a smile. "She does." He turned to look at Nora, struck by how the firelight caught in her auburn hair and softened her features. She was beautiful, he realized, not just in appearance but in the strength and determination she carried. "You both do." Something shifted in the air between them. Nora's eyes met his, and he saw his own feelings reflected back at him. The attraction had been building slowly, so gradually that he had not fully acknowledged it until this moment. But now it was undeniable. "Damon," she whispered, and the way she said his name made his heart clench. He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. But she did not move, and when his lips met hers, it felt like coming home. The kiss was gentle and tentative, full of unspoken questions and careful hope. When they pulled apart, Nora's cheeks were flushed. "I did not expect this," she admitted. "Neither did I, but I am not sorry." "Neither am I." She bit her lip. "But this is complicated. You are my employer and I am living in your house with my baby. I know. And I do not want you to feel pressured or obligated in any way." Damon took her hand again, but I also cannot ignore what I feel. You have brought light back into this house, Nora. Both you and Rose. And somewhere along the way, I started to care for you as more than just someone who works for me. I care for you too, she said softly. I have tried not to, because I was afraid. I have already lost one man I loved, and the thought of opening my heart again terrified me. But you make me feel safe in a way I have not felt in so long. Then we will take this slow, Damon said. No rushing, no pressure. We will just see where it goes. She nodded, and they sat together by the fire until the storm passed, their hands intertwined and their hearts cautiously hopeful. Christmas came, and Damon surprised Nora by decorating the house with pine boughs and red ribbons. He had carved a small wooden rattle for Rose and bought fabric in town for Nora to make herself a new dress. She had protested the expense, but he insisted. You deserve something nice, he said firmly. And besides, I want you to have it. Nora gave him a knitted scarf in return, the wool soft and warm. I made it in the evenings after Rose went to sleep, she explained shyly. I wanted to give you something. He wrapped it around his neck immediately, even though they were inside. I will treasure it. They spent Christmas Day together as a family, and the word no longer felt strange to any of them. Damon held Rose while Nora prepared a special dinner, and they ate by candlelight with the fire crackling in the hearth. It was simple and perfect, and when Nora kissed him goodnight at the stairs, Damon felt more content than he had ever thought possible. January brought new challenges. A neighboring rancher, Garrett Thompson, started spreading rumors in town about Damon's living arrangement with Nora. Thompson was a bitter man who had tried to buy Damon's ranch several times and been refused. Now he saw an opportunity to cause trouble. It is not decent, Thompson said loudly in the saloon one evening. A single man and a single woman living under one roof with a baby makes you wonder about that child's real father, does it not? The words got back to Damon through Miguel, who had been in town buying supplies. Damon's jaw tightened with anger, but Nora placed a calming hand on his arm. Let him talk, she said. We know the truth, and that is what matters. He is sullying your reputation. My reputation was already in question when I was living in a church and my baby was found on a stranger's porch. Nora's voice was steady. I do not care what Garrett Thompson thinks. I care about Rose and I care about you. That is all. But Damon cared. He cared because he did not want Nora or Rose to suffer because of small-minded gossip. He also cared because his feelings for Nora had grown into something deep and unshakable. He loved her, he realized, and he wanted to spend the rest of his life with her. That realization led him to the jeweler in town on a cold February morning. The shop was small but well-stocked, and the owner, an elderly man named Mr. Goldstein, greeted him warmly. What can I do for you, Mr. Crawford? I need a ring, Damon said. An engagement ring. Mr. Goldstein's eyes twinkled. For the young lady staying at your ranch, yes. I have heard she is a fine woman, and the baby is precious, from what folks say. They are both precious to me, Damon said firmly, which is why I want the best ring you have. Mr. Goldstein showed him several options, but Damon's eyes kept returning to a simple gold band with a small emerald set in the center. That one, he said. The green matches her eyes. He carried the ring home in his pocket, waiting for the right moment. It came a week later on a Sunday afternoon when the weather was unexpectedly mild. Nora had put Rose down for a nap, and she joined Damon on the porch, where he was watching the sun sink toward the mountains. Beautiful evening, she said, settling into the chair beside him. It is. He took a deep breath, his heart pounding. Nora, can I talk to you about something? Of course. He turned to face her, taking her hands in his. These past few months have been the happiest of my life. When I found Rose on my porch, I had no idea that it would lead to this, to you, to feeling like I have a family again. I love you, Nora Fenwick. I love your strength and your kindness and the way you hum while you work. I love how you take care of Rose and how you have brought light into this house. And I love Rose like she is my own daughter. Tears were streaming down Nora's face. Damon, I know this might seem fast, and I know we have only known each other for a few months, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. He released one of her hands to pull the ring from his pocket. Will you marry me? Will you let me be your husband and Rose's father? Will you build a life with me here on this ranch? Nora's sob was half laugh, half cry. Yes, yes, of course I will marry you. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and then she was in his arms, kissing him with all the love and hope and joy that had been building between them. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were crying and laughing at the same time. I love you, she whispered against his lips. I have loved you for weeks now, but I was afraid to say it. You never have to be afraid with me, Damon promised. I will spend the rest of my life making sure you and Rose are safe and loved. They were married 3 weeks later in the small church where Nora had once slept in the back room. Reverend Martin performed the ceremony with tears in his eyes, clearly moved by the story of how they had come together. Miguel stood as Damon's best man, and Mrs. Goldstein, the jeweler's wife, stood with Nora. Rose, dressed in a tiny white gown that Nora had sewn herself, gurgled happily throughout the ceremony. The town turned out for the wedding, curiosity bringing even those who had participated in the gossip. But when they saw the genuine love between Damon and Nora and the gentle way he held Rose during the reception, even the hardest hearts softened. Garrett Thompson was noticeably absent, but Damon did not care. He had everything he needed right here. Their wedding night was tender and filled with whispered promises. Damon made love to his wife slowly, carefully, treating her like the precious gift she was. Afterward, they lay tangled together in his bed, now their bed, listening to Rose sleep peacefully in the small crib they had moved into the corner of the room. Thank you, Nora whispered into the darkness. For what? For being the man I left my daughter with. For being the kind of person who would protect a stranger's baby. For loving us both. Damon kissed her forehead. Thank you for trusting me with something so precious. Thank you for bringing love back into my life. The months that followed were filled with the simple joys of building a life together. Nora flourished as Damon's wife, her confidence growing as she took on the role of ranch wife. She befriended the other women in the area, including Miguel's daughter Elena, who became a close friend and confidante. Rose thrived under the love of 2 parents. She took her first steps in the parlor on a sunny April morning, stumbling toward Damon with her arms outstretched. He caught her and swung her into the air, making her giggle with delight while Nora watched with tears of joy. As spring turned to summer, Nora began to suspect she was pregnant again. She waited until she was certain before telling Damon, choosing a quiet evening after Rose had gone to bed. They were sitting on the porch, as had become their habit, watching the stars appear in the darkening sky. Damon, I have something to tell you. He looked at her, noting the nervous excitement in her eyes. What is it? I am with child. We are going to have a baby. The joy that lit up his face was brighter than any star. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close. Truly, truly. I think the baby will come in January, around the anniversary of when you found Rose. A perfect gift, he murmured, his hand settling protectively over her still flat stomach. I am so happy, Nora, so incredibly happy. She laughed, the sound full of contentment. So am I. I never thought I could feel this way again after losing my first husband. But you have given me a new life, a new chance at happiness. We gave that to each other, Damon corrected. You saved me as much as I saved you. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Nora had bouts of sickness in the early months. Damon hovered protectively, earning both affection and exasperation from his wife. He hired a woman from town to help with the heavier housework, insisting that Nora needed to rest. I am pregnant, not fragile, she protested after he carried her to bed one evening. I know. But let me take care of you anyway. She softened at that, pulling him down beside her. You are a good man, Damon Crawford. I am a man in love with his wife. Rose, now over a year old and walking steadily, seemed to sense the change in her mother. She became more affectionate, often patting Nora's growing belly with gentle hands. Damon taught her to say baby, and she would toddle around the house announcing it proudly to anyone who would listen. In December, as Nora grew large with child, Damon began preparing for the birth. He brought in a midwife from town, a capable woman named Mrs. Harrison who had delivered most of the babies in San Bernardino. She examined Nora and pronounced everything healthy and normal. This one should come easier than your first, Mrs. Harrison said. Your body knows what to do now. Nora hoped she was right. Rose's birth had been long and difficult, made worse by the fact that her husband had been dead for 3 months, and she had been alone except for a midwife she barely knew. This time, she had Damon beside her, and that made all the difference. The baby came on a snowy January night, arriving just after midnight. Nora's labor was intense but mercifully shorter than Rose's had been. Damon stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand and murmuring encouragement even when she squeezed hard enough to hurt. You are doing so well, my love, he whispered. Just a little longer. And then, with one final push, their son entered the world with a lusty cry that woke Rose in the next room. Mrs. Harrison cleaned the baby and placed him on Nora's chest, and both parents wept at the sight of his perfect, tiny face. He is beautiful, Nora breathed. He looks like you, Damon said, stroking the baby's dark hair. They named him Daniel after Damon's father. Rose was brought in to meet her new brother, and she stared at him with wide, curious eyes before gently touching his small hand. Baby, she announced proudly, and everyone laughed. The days after Daniel's birth were exhausting but joyful. Damon proved to be as devoted a father as he was a husband, taking night feedings when he could and walking the floor with a fussy baby so Nora could rest. He juggled ranch work with family responsibilities, often seen riding with Daniel strapped to his chest in a carrier that Alina had made. Never thought I would see the day when Damon Crawford became a family man, Miguel said one afternoon, grinning at the sight of his boss with a baby. Neither did I, Damon admitted, but I would not change it for anything. As winter gave way to spring, the ranch flourished. Damon's cattle herd grew, and he hired additional hands to help manage the expanding operation. Nora's garden bloomed with vegetables and flowers, and she began selling her baked goods in town, earning her own money that she saved carefully. One afternoon in May, a stranger rode up to the ranch. She was a woman in her 50s, well-dressed and riding a fine horse. Damon met her in the yard, his hand instinctively moving to the gun at his hip. "Can I help you, madam? Are you Damon Crawford?" "I am." She dismounted gracefully. "My name is Margaret Fenwick." "I believe you are married to my daughter-in-law, Nora." Damon's eyes widened. Nora had mentioned her late husband's mother only briefly, saying they had been estranged after her son's death. "Miss Fenwick is inside with the children. Would you like to see her, if she will see me?" He led Margaret into the house, where Nora was sitting in the parlor with Rose playing at her feet and Daniel asleep in her arms. She looked up at the sound of footsteps and froze when she saw Margaret. "Mrs. Fenwick, Nora." The older woman's voice was thick with emotion. I came to apologize and to meet my granddaughter, if you will allow it. Nora's grip tightened on Daniel. You told me I was not welcome after James died. You said I was not really family. I know, and I was wrong. I was grieving my son, and I lashed out at you in my pain. But I have regretted it every day since. Margaret's eyes filled with tears as she looked at Rose. Is that my granddaughter? Yes, her name is Rose. She looks like James. Margaret wiped her eyes. Nora, I know I do not deserve your forgiveness. But I want to be part of your life if you will let me. I want to know my grandchildren and to make amends for the way I treated you. Nora looked at Damon, who gave her an encouraging nod. She took a deep breath. It hurt when you pushed me away. I had just lost my husband and I needed family. I know, and I am so sorry. But I also understand grief. I know how it can make us say and do things we do not mean. Nora shifted Daniel in her arms. This is Daniel, my son with Damon. And you are right, Rose does look like James. She has his eyes. Margaret approached slowly as if afraid Nora might change her mind. When she reached the chair, she knelt down to Rose's level. Hello, sweet girl, I am your grandmother. Rose, never shy, reached out and touched Margaret's face. Gamma. Yes, darling, Gamma. Margaret's tears flowed freely now, and even Damon found himself moved by the reunion. They spent the afternoon talking, with Margaret explaining that she had hired a detective to find Nora after months of searching. She had gone to Missouri first, then traced Nora's path to San Bernardino. When she heard about Nora's marriage and new baby, she had almost turned back, afraid she had lost her chance. But I had to try, Margaret said. I had to tell you how sorry I was and to see if there was any way to repair what I broke. By the time Margaret left that evening, she had extracted a promise from Nora to bring the children to visit her ranch, which was 2 days' ride north. She also invited them to stay as long as they liked, offering to help with the children and to get to know Damon properly. Your son would have liked him, Nora said as Margaret prepared to leave. James always admired honest, hard-working men. I can see why you love him, Margaret said, glancing at Damon, who was playing with Rose in the yard. He is a good man. After Margaret left, Nora fell into Damon's arms, emotionally exhausted. I did not expect that. Life has a way of surprising us, he said, kissing the top of her head. Are you glad she came? I think so. It will take time to rebuild trust, but Rose deserves to know her grandmother. And I think it will be good for Mrs. Fenwick, too. She has been alone with her grief for too long. They made the trip to Margaret's ranch in June, traveling with both children and Miguel, who insisted on coming along for protection. Margaret's ranch was larger than Damon's, with a beautiful house that had been built by her late husband. She welcomed them warmly and spent the week doting on her grandchildren. Watching Margaret with Rose, seeing the older woman's face light up at the child's laughter, Nora felt the last of her resentment fade away. Everyone deserved a second chance, she thought. She had gotten one when she left Rose on Damon's porch, and Margaret deserved the same. The years that followed brought more children and more joy. A daughter they named Nancy was born 2 years after Daniel, followed by twin boys 3 years later. The house was constantly filled with noise and laughter, and Damon often joked that he had gone from a lonely bachelor to the head of a small army in just a few years. I would not have it any other way, he would say, gathering his children into his arms while Nora watched with a smile. Rose grew into a kind, intelligent girl who loved helping her mother in the garden and riding with her father. She never forgot that Damon was not her biological father, but she never doubted his love for her. He treated all his children equally, with patience and affection that earned him their unwavering devotion. Margaret became a regular visitor to the ranch, usually staying for several weeks at a time. She and Nora developed a warm relationship, united by their love for the children and their memories of James. Margaret also formed an unexpected friendship with Damon, who reminded her of her late husband in many ways. The ranch continued to prosper under Damon's management. He became known throughout San Bernardino as a fair employer and a devoted family man. Even Garrett Thompson eventually made peace with him, admitting grudgingly that Damon and Nora's marriage had turned out better than he expected. One evening, 15 years after Damon had found Rose on his porch, he and Nora sat together on their familiar spot on the porch. The sounds of their children playing in the yard drifted to them on the warm summer breeze. Rose, now a young woman of 16, was teaching her younger siblings a new game while Daniel, a serious boy of 14, watched over them protectively. "You ever think about that morning?" Nora asked, her head resting on Damon's shoulder. "The morning you found Rose." "I think about it all the time," he said. "It was the day my life changed forever." "Mine too. I was so scared, Damon. I thought leaving her was the worst thing I could ever do as a mother, but it turned out to be the best decision I ever made. You were protecting her the only way you knew how. And it brought us together." Nora lifted her head to look at him, her green eyes still as beautiful as the day he had first seen them across that dusty street. "I love you, Damon Crawford. Thank you for keeping your promise." "What promise?" "The one you made that day in town when I told you who I was. You said you would protect us both, and you have, every single day since then." Damon cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the happy tears that had started to fall. "It was the easiest promise I ever kept. Protecting you and our children is not a burden, Nora. It is a privilege and a joy." He kissed her then, long and deep, while their children's laughter filled the evening air. When they finally pulled apart, Rose was standing at the bottom of the porch steps, a knowing smile on her young face. "Are you two getting sentimental again?" she teased. "Maybe," Damon said, reaching out to pull his daughter into a hug. "Is that a crime?" "Not at all." Rose hugged him back tightly. "I am glad Mama left me on your porch, Papa. Best decision she ever made." "Second best," Nora corrected. "The best was marrying him." The family gathered on the porch as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Daniel brought his mother wildflowers he had picked. Nancy chattered about a bird's nest she had found. The twins, still young enough to demand attention, climbed onto Damon's lap and begged for a story. As Damon began to tell a tale about a brave cowboy and a magical horse, Nora looked around at her family and felt her heart swell with gratitude. Her life had taken her through darkness and desperation, through loss and fear. But it had also brought her here, to this moment, surrounded by love and laughter in a home filled with the sounds of her children. She caught Damon's eye over the twins' heads, and the look they shared said everything that words could not. They had built this life together, starting from that desperate morning when she had left her baby on a stranger's porch, and he had whispered a promise that changed everything. "I will protect you both," and he had. Every single day, in ways big and small, Damon Crawford had kept that promise. He had given her safety when she had nowhere to turn. He had given her love when she thought her heart was too broken to open again. He had given Rose a father and given all their children a home filled with warmth and security. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, and the children eventually drifted inside to prepare for bed, Damon and Nora remained on the porch. It had become their sanctuary over the years, this simple wooden platform where they had shared so many conversations and stolen so many kisses. 15 years, Damon mused. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like a lifetime ago. "Both," Nora agreed. I can hardly remember what my life was like before you, but I remember exactly how terrified I was that morning. I walked away from your porch 3 times before I could actually leave her. What made you finally do it? I heard her starting to cry, and I knew if I did not leave then, I never would. So I ran. I hid behind the general store and watched you come out onto your porch. I saw you find her, saw the way you picked up the basket so carefully. Her voice grew thick with emotion. And I saw the look on your face when you read my note. That was when I knew I had made the right choice. What kind of look? Determined, protective, like you had already decided she was yours to keep safe. Nora turned to face him fully. Even then, before you knew anything about us, you were already committed to helping. That is who you are, Damon. That is why I fell in love with you. He pulled her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. I fell in love with you the moment I saw you watching me from across the street. You looked so fierce and so frightened all at once. I wanted to protect you almost as much as I wanted to protect Rose. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the kind of silence that only comes from years of shared life and deep understanding. Inside, they could hear the children settling down, their voices growing quieter as bedtime approached. "Mama, Papa," Nancy's voice called from inside. "Daniel is being mean." "Am not," Daniel protested. Damon and Nora shared a laugh as they stood up. "Duty calls," he said. "Always," she agreed. But her smile said she would not have it any other way. The years continued to pass, marked by the steady rhythm of ranch life and the milestones of their growing children. Rose met a young man named William Hartley, the son of a neighboring rancher, and after a proper courtship that Damon watched over with protective intensity, they were married in the same church where Damon and Nora had exchanged their vows. "She is so young," Damon said on the morning of the wedding, his voice rough with emotion. "She is 19, Nora reminded him gently. "The same age I was when I married James. And William is a good man. You know that. I do. But she will always be that tiny baby I found on my porch." Nora took his hands, looking up into his face. The years had added some silver to his dark hair and carved lines around his eyes, but he was still the handsome, strong man she had fallen in love with. "You gave her a wonderful childhood, Damon. You gave her security and love and the confidence to choose a good man for herself. Now we have to let her go build her own life. I know, it is just hard. It is. But we will get through it together, just like everything else." At the wedding, Damon walked Rose down the aisle with his head held high despite the tears in his eyes. When the Reverend asked who gave this woman to be married, Damon's voice was clear and strong. "Her mother and I do." Rose squeezed his hand before he let her go, whispering, "Thank you, Papa, for everything." After the wedding, after the dancing and celebrating were done, Damon and Nora returned to their ranch house feeling the bittersweet ache of their daughter leaving home. But they still had 4 children filling the house with noise, and life went on in its beautiful, chaotic way. Daniel proved to have a natural talent for ranching, and Damon began training him to eventually take over the operation. The boy, now a young man of 17, worked alongside his father with quiet dedication, learning everything Damon could teach him about cattle, horses, and land management. "He is going to be better at this than I ever was," Damon told Nora one evening after watching Daniel handle a difficult situation with several escaped steers. "He learned from the best," Nora said, "but do not be in such a hurry to hand over the reins. You still have plenty of good years ahead of you." Nancy showed interest in her mother's baking business, which had grown considerably over the years. Nora now supplied baked goods to several establishments in San Bernardino, and Nancy loved experimenting with new recipes and decorating techniques. The twins, now 12 years old, were a handful of energy and mischief. They kept everyone on their toes, but they also brought tremendous joy to the family. Damon loved taking them fishing in the creek that ran through his property, teaching them the same skills his father had taught him. Margaret continued to visit regularly until she passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 74. Her death hit the family hard, particularly Rose, who had grown very close to her grandmother. But there was comfort in knowing that Margaret had spent her final years surrounded by love and family, healing the wounds that grief had once created. Through all these years and changes, Damon and Nora's love continued to deepen. They had weathered storms, both literal and figurative, supporting each other through illnesses, financial difficulties, and the normal challenges of raising a large family. Their bedroom remained a sanctuary where they could be simply husband and wife, not parents or ranchers or business people. "Do you ever wish things had been different?" Damon asked one night as they lay together in the darkness. "That you had not lost James, that you had not been forced to leave Rose on a stranger's porch?" Nora was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously. "I wish James had not died. He was a good man, and he deserved to meet his daughter. But do I wish things had been different between us? No, Damon, I cannot wish that, because you have given me a life more beautiful than anything I could have imagined. You have given me love and safety and more children than I ever dreamed of having. You have given Rose a father who loves her completely. How could I wish any of that away? Even though the path to get here was so painful, even then. Sometimes the hardest paths lead to the best destinations." She turned in his arms to face him. "What about you? Do you wish things had been different?" "Not for a single second. Finding Rose on my porch was the greatest gift I have ever received. And you, Nora Crawford, are the love of my life. I would walk through fire for you." "Let us hope you never have to," she said with a laugh. But she kissed him deeply, pouring all her love and gratitude into the kiss. On the 20th anniversary of the day Damon found Rose on his porch, the entire family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. Rose came with her husband William and their 2 young children. Daniel brought his new wife, a sweet girl named Sarah whom he had married the previous spring. Nancy had recently become engaged to the doctor's son, and she brought him to meet the family. The twins, now young men themselves, had just returned from a cattle drive that had taken them as far as Nevada. The house was filled to bursting with people, noise, and love. Nora cooked for days preparing the feast, and the entire community was invited to share in the celebration. Miguel, now retired but still sharp as ever, gave a toast that brought tears to many eyes. 20 years ago, our boss found a baby on his porch and made a decision that changed many lives. He could have taken that baby to an orphanage or to the sheriff. But instead, he opened his heart and his home. And when the baby's mother came looking for her, he opened his heart and his home again. That is the kind of man Damon Crawford is. That is the kind of woman Nora Crawford is. They have built something beautiful here, not just in land and cattle, but in family and love. We are all blessed to know them. As the evening wore on and the guests mingled, Damon found himself standing in the yard watching his family. Rose was showing her children how to feed the chickens. Daniel was explaining something about horses to his brother-in-law. Nancy was laughing at something her fiancé had said. The twins were arm wrestling to the delight of several young women from town. Nora came to stand beside him, slipping her hand into his. "Penny, for your thoughts." "I am thinking about how different my life would have been if I had made different choices that morning. What if I had just taken Rose to the sheriff? What if I had not waited in town long enough for you to approach me? What if I had not invited you to come home with me? But you did all those things, because that is who you are." He corrected. "That is who we are. Everything we have built together." She leaned her head on his shoulder, fitting perfectly against his side as she always had. "Together, that is the best word I know." As the stars came out and the party continued around them, Damon reflected on the incredible journey his life had taken. He had gone from a lonely bachelor living in a house too big for one person to a man surrounded by family and love. He had gone from wondering if he would ever find someone to share his life with to being married to a woman who made every day brighter. And it had all started with a baby's cry on a cold November morning and a desperate mother's decision to trust a stranger. "Thank you," he whispered to Nora. "For what?" "For trusting me, for loving me, for building this life with me. Thank you for being worthy of that trust, for loving me back, for being the kind of man who whispers I will protect you both and then spends 20 years proving it every single day." They kissed there under the stars, surrounded by the sounds of their family and the land they had built their lives on. It was a simple kiss, sweet and comfortable with 20 years of marriage behind it. But it was also filled with all the passion and promise that had brought them together in the first place. The party continued late into the night, but eventually, guests began to leave and children began to yawn. Rose's family left for their own ranch just down the road, and Daniel and Sarah retired to the small house Damon had built for them on the property. Nancy and her fiancé headed back to town with his parents, and the twins finally stopped arm wrestling long enough to collapse into their beds. Alone at last, Damon and Nora climbed the stairs to their bedroom. They were older now, with gray in their hair and lines on their faces, but they still found joy in each other's arms. They made love slowly, tenderly, with all the familiarity and passion that came from truly knowing another person. Afterward, Nora traced the lines of Damon's face with gentle fingers. "You know what I love most about you? Tell me." "Your heart. The way you love so completely and so fiercely, the way you protect without smothering, the way you give without expecting anything in return." She kissed his chest, right over his heart. This is what I love most." Damon held her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the weight of her body against his. "My heart is yours, Nora. It has been from the moment I saw you standing across that street, looking terrified and brave all at once." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, just as they had done for 20 years, just as they would continue to do for all the years to come. The following morning, Damon woke early as was his habit. He dressed quietly to avoid waking Nora and made his way downstairs. The house was quiet, everyone still sleeping off the previous night's celebration. He made coffee and stepped out onto the porch, the same porch where his life had changed 2 decades earlier. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. The mountains in the distance stood eternal and unchanging, witnesses to all the joy and sorrow and love that had unfolded in the valley below. Damon stood there with his coffee, thinking about all the mornings he had spent in this exact spot, first alone, then with Nora beside him, then with children running around their feet. He heard the door open behind him and turned to see Nora stepping out, wrapped in a shawl against the morning chill. She came to stand beside him, and he put his arm around her shoulders automatically. "Could not sleep?" she asked. "Just wanted to watch the sunrise. It is a beautiful morning." "Every morning with you is beautiful." She smiled up at him. "Even the ones where the twins are fighting and Nancy has burned the biscuits and Daniel has brought in mud all over my clean floors." He laughed. "Those might be my favorite mornings. The messy ones where everything is chaos, but everyone is healthy and happy." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the sun climb higher in the sky. Birds began to sing in the trees, and somewhere in the distance, cattle were lowing as the ranch came to life. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day?" Nora asked suddenly. "When I got into your wagon, I said a lot of things. You said I will protect you both, just like that, simple and certain. You did not know me. You did not know if I was telling the truth or if I would steal from you or cause trouble. But you looked at me and you saw someone who needed help, and you decided right then and there that you would be the one to give it. How could I do anything else? You were Rose's mother. And you looked like you were carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders. I was. And then you took some of that weight from me. You have been taking it from me ever since, sharing my burdens and doubling my joys." She turned to face him fully. "I know I tell you this all the time, but I need you to hear it again. You are the best man I have ever known, Damon Crawford. And I thank God every single day that I was desperate enough and brave enough to leave my baby on your porch." Damon set his coffee cup down and took both of Nora's hands in his. "And I thank God every single day that I was the kind of man you felt you could trust with something so precious. You and Rose and all our children are the greatest blessings of my life. Everything I am, everything I have, I would give gladly for your happiness. You already have given everything. Your heart, your home, your name, your love. You have given us a life I never dreamed was possible." He kissed her then, long and deep, there on the porch as the sun rose higher and the ranch awakened around them. It was a kiss that held 20 years of love and promises kept. It was a kiss that spoke of all the years still to come, of grandchildren to spoil and adventures yet to have and quiet mornings just like this one, standing together while the world came to life. When they finally pulled apart, the twins were stumbling out of the house, rubbing sleep from their eyes and demanding breakfast. The moment of quiet intimacy was over, but neither Damon nor Nora minded. This was their life, after all, full of interruptions and chaos and more love than any two people deserved. As Nora went inside to start breakfast, and Damon followed to help, he took one last look at the porch steps where a basket had once sat. There was no sign now of that desperate morning, no indication that this was the place where everything had changed. But Damon would never forget. He would never forget the baby's cry or the young mother's tears, or the moment he had decided to open his heart to strangers who would become his family. He had whispered a promise that cold November morning, "I will protect you both." And he had spent 20 years proving that some promises were meant to be kept forever. Some promises were the foundation upon which entire lives could be built. Some promises were worth everything. And as he stood in his kitchen watching Nora cook while their sons set the table and laughter filled the air, Damon Crawford knew that he would keep that promise for the rest of his days. He would protect them. He would love them. He would be grateful every morning that he woke up to this beautiful, chaotic, perfect life they had built together. Because 20 years ago, a desperate woman had trusted him with her most precious treasure. And he had proven himself worthy of that trust, one day at a time, one moment at a time, one whispered promise at a time.